Brexit and the state of the UK. Let's bring in Jeff Stacey. He's a former State Department official in the Obama administration. Jeff, I was going to start with Johnson, but after hearing those comments from David Cameron, pretty strong stuff. What are your thoughts?
Well, he is right. He's accurate. He is responsible even more than he suggests. Not only was it a bad idea to ever put this to a vote, the country wasn't itching for it, wasn't ready for it, didn't understand it, and of course he didn't either. But it's his austerity policies for years that had the lower and middle classes in Britain so upset and willing to dramatically go for all the lies that he correctly blames Johnson and Gove and others for in the current cabinet.
So you've got Johnson now in Luxembourg. What's his play there?
We're surprised that he's there. He's frankly looking for some place that will be at least a little more open-minded than Ireland, where he's been, other countries. We basically have a situation where the EU has remained lock solid and lockstep with one another. They are expecting him to come up with some, so far, unrealizable solution to this, or to stick with the current deal.
What about his reception there in Luxembourg from officials and, as we saw, from some protesters?
That's right. I mean, all over, it's harsh. He's getting nailed anywhere in the country, anywhere in London, and now abroad as well. And it really shows you, ironically, how unified the EU is. If you're getting protests about a country way in the north, all the way in more central Europe, you've got a situation where actually Europe is pretty united, and it's in everyone's interest that Britain actually steps back from this precipice and sticks in the EU. The US needs that. The UK needs that for its own interests, and so do the Europeans.
Jenny Longden was reporting there that talks will now happen on a daily basis. Are there any alternatives being considered?
There really aren't, because there was a small consideration that the Northern Irish DUP party that was propping up the government was going to somehow be flexible on the backstop, maybe a Northern Ireland only, but that has been quashed by the DUP party. And so we really don't have anything on the table. There's nothing viable out there. And so it really looks like Johnson is gambling, and they need a caretaker prime minister now. If the Supreme Court basically rules against him, as one of the other high courts did just a few days ago, then he would probably not even survive and have to resign, and then we'd be looking at a caretaker prime minister and probably a second referendum.
You talked about the Irish backstop. There has been a suggestion of an all-Ireland food zone, perhaps, as an option. Can you explain that, and is it a realistic option?
It really doesn't seem to be, because there still, for example, aren't proper governing institutions back in place in Northern Ireland. So the whole worry, obviously, is if there is no backstop, that a hard border that goes in could reignite violence with the modern version of the IRA and all these kinds of things. But an all-Ireland fish market is something that so far the Irish government hasn't supported, and it would be even less likely that the more British inclined DUP and other parties would go for that.
Why do you think the world is so invested in this part of Brexit, in the Irish issue?
Well, we earlier on lived through some dark days with a lot of violence, what were called the Troubles in that part of the world, and lots of victims. So you had a situation where we all thought we were beyond this. And the Irish in particular, and Northern Irish, thought they were beyond this, and the British as well. So you've got a situation where no one wants to even risk getting near that sort of scenario again. They've had such a good time, and basically a rising living standards consistently. Well, they've been EU members together as a united Ireland on the one hand and the United Kingdom on the other.
There's been a lot of focus on the impact that Brexit will have on Britain. What about the impact that it will have on Ireland?
It would be very negative indeed, and that's why Prime Minister Varadkar, when he had Johnson there just a few weeks ago, he basically read him the riot act behind the scenes. And then they managed to sort of get back on track and have a little joint press conference, but he gave no ground at all and basically said, we'll give you a chance to come up with some sort of rabbit out of the hat against the odds, a reformulation of Theresa May's deal, which was rejected so many times, he probably is not going to be able to do that. Varadkar just said a couple days ago that the gap is extremely wide.
There'll be a lot to watch before that October 17th deadline there. Thank you so much, Jeff Stacey, for joining us here.
My pleasure.